They didn't just sit me on a broken chair. They placed me there with full knowledge, with quiet calculation, with that kind of cruel amusement only the young can have when they believe the old are too fragile, too weak, too desperate for love to ever fight back. I heard it in their voices before I even lowered myself down, the stifled giggles, the quick exchange of glances, the mocking tone that dripped from Emily's lips when she said, "Grandma won't mind." They thought they were clever, hiding their cruelty in the folds of family tradition, but I felt it in my bones the way you feel a storm long before the thunder breaks. They wanted me humiliated. They wanted me small. They wanted me to crack just like that chair. And when the wood finally gave way beneath me, when the leg splintered with a sound as sharp and unforgiving as a gunshot, when my body lurched sideways and slammed to the ground with a pain that ripped through my spine and lit my hip on fire, they didn't gasp. They didn't rush. They didn't scream in concern. No, they laughed. My own grandchildren. They laughed. I saw Jacob smirk, that cocky teenage grin that once belonged to a boy who begged me for cookies after school and now twisted into the face of a stranger who thought breaking his grandmother was a punchline. I heard Emily's whisper, low and vicious, guessed she should have sat lighter, and the others stifled their chuckles like hyenas circling a wounded animal. My daughter turned away. My son-in-law carved chicken as if nothing had happened, and I lay there on the sticky floor, cobbler shattered, peaches spread like a wound, the sweet smell of cinnamon and sugar mocking me. Do you know what it feels like to push yourself upright when your back screams and your pride bleeds, to wipe food off your dress while the family you raised pretends not to see the tears burning your eyes? Do you know what it is to stand at the counter like an intruder in a home you once paid for, nibbling through pain while others feast, knowing the only seat you were given was meant to collapse beneath you? That's what they gave me. Not dinner. Not welcome. Not love. A broken chair, a bruised body, and laughter that will echo in my ears until my last breath. I drove home in silence, the summer air pressing against my face, the pain in my spine sharpening with every bump in the road. But the ache wasn't the worst of it. The worst was the memory of their faces, the way cruelty sat so easily on them, the way my absence of protest was exactly what they expected. They thought I would swallow it, the way I've swallowed every slight, every cold shoulder, every forgotten birthday call, every little dig that said you're old, you're done, you don't matter. They thought they had broken me with that chair. But I am not broken. Not yet. Not ever. And next time, I will bring my own chair. And when I sit down, it will not be to beg for a place at their table. It will be to show them, in front of every smug face and every silent witness, that the one they thought too weak to fight back is the one holding the power to tear their little world apart. The bruise on my hip blossomed like a storm cloud, purple and blue spreading wider with every hour, and each time I bet to pick up a dish or lower myself into bed. The ache reminded me of the moment my own grandchildren decided that my pain was their entertainment. It wasn't just a fall. It was a message, a declaration that I was no longer worth the dignity of a sturdy seat, that my place in their home had been downgraded to a joke, a weak body balanced on 4 crooked legs until the inevitable collapse. I sat at my kitchen table the next morning, the air heavy with the smell of stale cobbler I hadn't bothered to scrape out of the sink, and I let the silence stretch around me like a noose. For years, I had told myself that the small things didn't matter, that a missed thank you, a forgotten Mother's Day card, a quick glance past me at the dinner table were just oversights, not omens. But now the truth stood in front of me as steady as that bruise. They weren't oversights. They were patterns. And patterns, left unchallenged, become habits. And habits, when they are cruel, become weapons. I thought about the chair, not just the way it broke, but the way it had been placed. In the corner, away from the center of the table. A folding chair, metal and thin, while the rest sat cushioned and tall on polished wood. It hadn't been random. No, someone carried it there, someone unfolded it, someone pointed to it with a smirk and said, "Grandma, sit." It was an act dressed as casual, but it was deliberate as hiding the good silverware when company comes or seating an unwanted guest near the kitchen door. My hands trembled as I reached for the folder I kept in the cabinet by the fridge, the one stuffed with old receipts, bills, and every bank statement I'd tucked away over the years. I pulled it onto the table and flipped through the pages. There it was, proof of every check I'd written for them. The down payment on their first house, the tuition advances, the credit card I co-signed, the groceries I'd bought week after week. Line after line, my handwriting, my sacrifice, my money. And what did I get in return? A chair meant to break under me. I stayed at that table for hours, the bruise throbbing with each shift in my seat, the weight of betrayal pressing harder than the pain. By the time the afternoon sun stretched across my kitchen floor, I knew one thing: I would never sit in a chair they chose for me again. The plan began small, almost quiet. I drove into town the next day, passing the familiar streets where my late husband and I used to walk on Sunday evenings, and I found myself in front of a furniture store I hadn't entered in decades. The glass windows reflected my own face back at me, lined, weary, but sharp with something I hadn't seen in a long time: resolve. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and new fabric. I walked slowly past rows of dining sets, my hand grazing the smooth surfaces, until I found it. A chair, not gaudy, not fancy, but solid carved oak, high-backed, firm cushion. Strong enough to hold a storm. Strong enough to hold me. I ran my hand along its armrest and felt the grain of the wood, steady and unyielding. "I'll take this one," I said to the clerk, my voice steady, almost cold. He raised his eyebrows. Most people by sets, not a single chair. But I wasn't most people anymore. I wasn't the woman who accepted whatever seat was handed to her. As he rang up the purchase, I imagined it, walking into my daughter's house with this chair in my hands, setting it down at the head of the table, lowering myself onto it while every eye followed me. And then, before they could laugh or whisper, I would tell the truth, not just about that chair, but about every quiet betrayal they thought I'd swallowed. That night, the bruise burned less, but the fire in my chest burned more. They had given me a broken chair. I was about to give them something far heavier, the weight of truth. The day of the next family dinner came faster than I expected, as if fate was impatient to see whether I'd follow through. My hip was still sore, the bruise a mottled map of purples and yellows, but I moved carefully, slowly, like a soldier preparing for battle. The new chair stood in the corner of my living room, gleaming in the evening light, waiting. I had polished the wood myself, not out of vanity but out of respect for the seat that would carry not just my body but my defiance. When the text from Linda came, "Dinner's at 6, bring whatever you like," I stared at the words a long while. Whatever I like. They thought I'd bring cobbler again, maybe fried chicken, maybe another bag of groceries to keep them from dipping into their own wallets. But this time, I was bringing something heavier than food. At 5:30, I loaded the chair into the trunk of my old Chevy. It barely fit, and I had to tie the lid down with rope, the kind of rope my husband once used for hauling lumber. As I tightened the knot, I thought of him, how he would have barked with laughter at the absurdity of a grandmother hauling a throne to her daughter's house. But he would have understood. He always understood the difference between swallowing pride and demanding respect. The drive felt longer than usual. Every turn of the wheels carried me closer to that table, that room, those faces that had turned me into a joke. My palms sweated on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from anticipation. I wasn't going there to scream. I wasn't going to cry or beg or plead. I was going there to sit. To sit in a chair that couldn't be broken, to sit in a place they couldn't deny me, and to let silence do what words had failed to do for years. When I pulled up to the curb, I saw them through the front window, Emily tossing her hair back in laughter, Jacob leaning against the counter scrolling his phone, Linda rushing between kitchen and table with platters of food. The smell of garlic bread wafted out when the door opened. "Hi, Mom," Linda said, surprised to see me hefting something from the trunk. "What's that?" "My chair," I answered flatly. Her eyebrows rose. "You didn't need to, I did." My voice was calm, steady, sharper than any knife in her kitchen. I carried it in myself, ignoring the ache in my hip, each step deliberate. The room fell quiet as I set it down, not at the corner of the table, not near the drafty doorway where they usually shoved me, but right at the head. The place of authority. The place of presence. Jacob chuckled nervously. "What, Grandma? You bringing your own furniture now?" "Yes," I said, lowering myself into the seat, the oak solid beneath me, unyielding. Because I don't trust the chairs in this house anymore. Silence. Thick, heavy charged. Emily shifted uncomfortably, fiddling with her napkin. Linda's face flushed red, torn between embarrassment and irritation. My son-in-law coughed into his fist. I folded my hands on the table, meeting each of their eyes in turn. Last week, I said slowly, clearly, someone put me on a chair that was meant to break. And it did. And you laughed. My words hung in the air like smoke. No one spoke. So from now on, I bring my own. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The weight of the chair beneath me spoke louder than anything else. Dinner went on, but the air was different. Every fork clink, every cough, every scrape of a chair leg sounded louder in the silence I had built. They glanced at me, then away, like children caught in a lie, but I didn't flinch. I cut my chicken. I ate my bread. I sat tall. By the time dessert came out, the balance had shifted. I wasn't the old woman in the corner anymore. I was the presence at the head of the table, the one they couldn't ignore. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Next time, I wouldn't just bring a chair. Next time, I'd bring the truth they'd been trying to bury under their laughter. The next Sunday came, and this time I didn't wait for Linda's text. I showed up at 6 sharp, chair strapped into the trunk like a soldier ready for duty. The sky was heavy with storm clouds, the kind that make the air feel charged, alive, dangerous. My hip still ached, but I welcomed the pain. It was a reminder, a bruise that had turned into a compass pointing me forward. When I walked in with that chair, the same hush fell as before. Forks paused midair. Emily's phone slipped lower in her hands. Jacob muttered something under his breath, but didn't finish the sentence. I set the chair down at the head of the table and sat, my palms resting flat against the polished oak. Evening, I said. Just that. And already, they shifted in their seats. Dinner began the usual way, too much food, too little warmth. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, store-bought rolls. They passed dishes without meeting my eyes. The air smelled of butter and garlic, but underneath it, I could smell fear, that faint sourness when people realize they're being watched, judged, measured. I let them squirm a while. Then, as Linda reached for the gravy boat, I spoke. You know, I said slowly, that wasn't the first time. She froze. What do you mean, Mom? I looked straight at her. The chair. The laughter. The way you all think it's harmless. I let my eyes sweep across the table, stopping on each face. Do you remember last Christmas, when you stuck me at the card table with the kids? Do you remember how you laughed when I couldn't reach the mashed potatoes and Jacob said, Grandma doesn't need seconds anyway? Jacob's smirk faltered. Or Emily's birthday, I went on, when I baked a cake from scratch, 3 layers, buttercream, sprinkles, and you all cut into the one her mother bought from the store, while mine sat untouched until it went stale. Emily's cheeks flushed. She stared at her plate. I leaned forward, my voice still calm, but sharper than any knife in that kitchen. And what about the day I drove 3 hours to watch Ruby's school play and nobody saved me a seat? I stood in the back with the janitor while you waved at friends in the front row. You didn't even look my way. The silence was thick now, pressing against the walls, making the clock tick louder than it had any right to. My son-in-law cleared his throat, trying to cut through the tension. Joe, maybe you're reading too much into no, my hand slammed against the oak armrest. Not hard, but enough to make every head jerk up. I am not reading too much into anything. I am finally reading it exactly as it is. Every broken chair, every empty seat, every laugh you thought I didn't hear. Linda's lips trembled. Mom, we didn't mean I cut her off. You didn't mean? You didn't mean to let me fall? You didn't mean to laugh when I hit the floor? You didn't mean to look away while I pulled myself up, sticky with cobbler, bruised, humiliated in the middle of my own family. Her face went pale. The storm outside growled, thunder rolling low across the sky. It fit the moment perfectly. I sat back in my chair, the solid oak unmoving beneath me, and folded my arms. This isn't about one broken chair. It's about years of them. Years of watching you all shrink me down to something convenient, something to mock, something to use when it suits you. Well, I don't shrink anymore. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the house seemed to hold its breath. And then, very slowly, I smiled. Not kindly, not warmly, but with the kind of cold satisfaction that comes when the truth finally cuts deeper than the lie. "This chair," I said, patting the oak arm, "will be here every Sunday. And so will I. And every time I sit down, I will remind you of what you tried to do to me." The thunder cracked again, sharp and close, rattling the window panes. The storm had arrived. So had I. The bruise on my hip had started to fade, but the memory of that fall hadn't softened one bit. If anything, the pain leaving my body only made the fire in my chest burn hotter. It was as if my flesh was healing, but my spirit was sharpening into something harder than bone. I wasn't going to carry that chair's collapse as a private shame. No, I was going to turn it into a weapon. I sat at my kitchen table one Wednesday morning, a cup of black coffee cooling by my elbow, and I opened the old spiral notebook where I used to write grocery lists. For years, it had been filled with neat lines: milk, butter, flour, the humble script of a woman who spent her life providing. But this time, I wasn't writing groceries. I was writing truth. One page for every insult. One page for every empty chair, every corner seat, every laugh at my expense. By the end of the day, I had 5 full pages, each line a stone, each word a blade. It didn't look like a list anymore. It looked like an indictment. The case against my family, written in ink they couldn't erase. And once I saw it there, raw and undeniable, I knew silence would never do again. Silence had been my prison for too long. That night, I stared at the oak chair standing in the corner of my living room. It looked almost holy in the lamplight, solid and strong, a symbol of what I had decided. Never again would I take whatever seat they shoved at me. Never again would I play the fool in their private theater of cruelty. The chair was more than wood and cushion. It was proof. Proof that I still had a choice. Proof that I could claim space. But proof isn't enough if it stays hidden. Proof has to be seen. So when I heard there was going to be a community potluck at the church on Friday, I knew my stage had arrived. The fellowship hall buzzed with noise when I arrived that evening. Long folding tables sagged under the weight of casseroles, Jell-O salads, pies, and crock-pots of chili. Children darted between legs, their laughter shrill, the air thick with the smell of baked beans, sugar cookies, and coffee so strong it could peel paint. Neighbors waved. The choir ladies fussed over the dessert table. The hum of small-town chatter filled every corner. And then I stepped inside, dragging my oak chair behind me. It wasn't subtle. The scrape of its legs on the linoleum was deliberate, heavy, a sound that silenced conversations one by one. People turned. They watched. A few chuckled nervously. "Now that's dedication," old Mr. Walsh muttered, adjusting his suspenders. "Bringing your own chair." I didn't answer. I set the oak chair down at the head of one table, not in the corner, not off to the side, the head. The place of presence. Then I walked back out the door. A minute later, I returned with another chair. The folding chair. The twin to the one that had betrayed me. Its legs wobbled, its seat dented. It was the same kind of chair that had sent me to the floor with cobbler dripping down my dress and laughter ringing in my ears. This time, I dragged it across the floor slowly. The screech of metal against tile sliced through the noise of the hall like a blade. People winced at the sound. Good. Let them feel the discomfort. Let them taste it the way I had. When I reached the center of the room, I turned and faced them. My voice was calm, but loud enough to cut through the murmurs. "This," I said, resting my hand on the folding chair, "is the kind of chair my grandchildren offered me at dinner last week. And when it broke under me, when I hit the ground, when the cobbler I'd baked for them shattered across the floor, they laughed. My own blood laughed. The room went quiet. Forks froze midair. A cough echoed from the back, and then nothing. Just silence. I let it sit. I let them taste it. Then I placed my hand on the oak chair, steady, strong, my throne in the middle of that hall. "This," I continued, "is the chair I bring now. Solid. Unshakable. Mine. Because I will never again sit where cruelty is handed to me. Not from strangers. Not from family. Not from anyone." A low murmur spread. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others stared at me with wide eyes, sympathy etched into their faces. I saw recognition, too, in the way a few older women nodded, in the way one man shifted uncomfortably like he'd seen his own mother treated the same. I didn't need applause. I didn't need pity. All I wanted was for the truth to breathe outside of my kitchen walls. And that night, it did. I sat in my oak chair, tall, steady, the hum of whispers circling me like a storm. I ate my meal in silence, every bite a declaration. And I knew, before the night was done, the story would travel. In small towns, gossip is faster than lightning, and truth, the raw kind, spoken without apology, moves fastest of all. By Sunday, every member of my family would hear what I had said. And they would know I wasn't the woman on the floor anymore. I wasn't the punchline. I was the storm. By Sunday, the air in town was already thick with whispers. I saw it in the way people looked at me in the grocery store, in the polite smiles from the neighbors who never smiled before, in the way Mrs. Perkins from across the street patted my arm and said softly, "Good for you, Joe." The story of the chair had traveled, and I hadn't even had to lift a finger. Truth has a way of finding its own legs when you finally set it free. So when Linda sent the usual text, "Dinner at 6, hope you can make it," I almost laughed. Hope you can make it. As if the only thing stopping me was convenience, not the weight of betrayal. But I decided to go. Not just because I wanted them to see me walk through that door with my oak chair again. I wanted them to see me do it with an audience. I made a few calls that afternoon. Nothing dramatic, nothing noisy. Just small invitations to old friends and nearby neighbors. "Why don't you come by Linda's this evening? She's cooking a big dinner. And I'll be there too." I didn't lie. I just let the suggestion do the work. Curiosity spreads faster than guilt. By 6 o'clock, I knew there would be more faces than my family expected. I loaded the oak chair into my Chevy and drove slow, steady, letting the anticipation tighten in my chest. When I pulled into their driveway, I saw extra cars lined up along the curb. Linda stepped out onto the porch, her face flushed, her voice pitched high. "Mom, what did you—" I carried the chair past her without a word. The dining room was crowded. My grandchildren, their friends, 2 neighbors from down the block, even the pastor and his wife. Plates clattered, voices hushed. Eyes followed me as I set the oak chair at the head of the table. My grandkids froze, their smirks gone. Linda looked like she might faint. I lowered myself onto the chair slowly, deliberately. The room fell silent except for the storm beginning to tap against the windows outside. "Evening," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I hope there's enough room at this table for the truth." No one moved. My son-in-law coughed. Emily stared at her lap. Jacob fiddled with his phone until I cleared my throat, and even that small sound made him flinch. I folded my hands on the table. "Some of you already know," I began, my eyes sweeping across the neighbors, "what happened here 2 weeks ago. The chair they gave me. The way it collapsed under me while the people I love most laughed. My own family laughed. Gasps rippled around the room. Mrs. Perkins whispered to her husband. The pastor's wife shook her head. I told this story at the church hall Friday night. I continued, my voice sharper now, slicing through the thick silence. Not because I wanted pity, but because I wanted people to know what disrespect looks like when it hides behind family dinners and polite smiles. And now I'm telling it here, in the place where it happened. Jacob muttered, "Grandma, you're making this bigger than." I snapped my gaze to him, cold enough to freeze him in place. Bigger than what? Bigger than your laughter when I hit the floor? Bigger than Emily's whisper about my weight? Bigger than the silence of every adult in this room while I stood, bruised, covered in cobbler, and ate standing up because no one offered me another chair. The neighbor's eyes widened. Someone at the far end of the table murmured, "My God." I leaned forward, pressing my palms into the oak armrests. You wanted to humiliate me quietly in this house where you thought the walls would keep your cruelty locked inside. But now these walls have ears. Now this table has witnesses. And from this moment on, every time you look at me, you'll know that the world knows too. The storm outside broke then, rain pounding against the windows, thunder rattling the glass. The timing was perfect. The sound of judgment itself. Linda's face crumpled, her voice barely a whisper. "Mom, please." but I didn't soften. Not yet. I sat back in my chair, tall, unshaken, while the storm screamed outside and silence screamed louder inside. And in that silence, they understood the broken chair had become a throne. And I wasn't stepping down. The storm passed by Monday, but its echo lingered in the air, just like the echo of my words lingered in that dining room. By midweek, I couldn't step into the post office or the pharmacy without someone leaning close, whispering, "I heard what you said, Joe. Good for you." My family had tried to bury me in silence, but now my voice had spread wider than they ever imagined. And fate, it seemed, was on my side. The town's annual summer fair was that Saturday. Everyone would be there, stalls lined with pies and jams, kids screaming on the Ferris wheel, the mayor making speeches nobody listened to, and at the heart of it all, the charity auction. This year, Linda had volunteered to coordinate it. She wanted the attention, the applause, the little spotlight that said, "Look what a fine family woman she is." Perfect. That morning, I strapped my oak chair into the back of my Chevy like I always did now. It wasn't just a seat anymore. It was my shield, my weapon, my proof. I drove to the fairground slow, steady, the smell of fried dough already drifting into the parking lot, the sound of laughter and carnival music spilling over the fences. When I carried the chair through the crowd, people noticed. Heads turned, whispers followed. There she is. That's the grandmother from church. The one with the chair. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. My presence was enough. The auction started just after noon, under the striped tent with rows of folding chairs lined up for the crowd. Cheap metal, the same kind that had betrayed me. I dragged mine forward and set it at the very front, right in view of the stage, and lowered myself onto it like a queen taking her throne. Linda was already on the platform, smiling too wide, her voice pitched sweet as she welcomed the crowd. She talked about generosity, about family, about community roots. Her words slid off me like rain off stone. She glanced my way once, and I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes when she spotted the oak chair gleaming in the sunlight. When the bidding began, I waited. I let her sell off pies, quilts, a handmade birdhouse. I let her grow comfortable, let the crowd clap politely. Then, when the microphone passed her way again, I rose. My oak chair scraped against the ground as I stood. That sound strong, heavy, deliberate, made every head turn. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clear over the tent. "Before we bid on the next item, I have something to say." Linda's face drained of color. "Mom, please, not now." I walked slowly to the front, my cane tapping against the stage steps. The crowd hushed. The fairground sounds seemed to fade, no more laughter, no more ride squealing, just my words and the pounding of my heart. I faced them all. My family, my neighbors, the strangers who'd only heard pieces of the story. 2 weeks ago, I began, my voice low but steady. This family put me in a broken chair. It collapsed under me. I fell. And instead of helping, instead of caring, they laughed. Gasps. Murmurs. Someone whispered, "That's shameful." I pointed to the oak chair, standing solid where I'd left it. Since then, I bring my own. Because I've learned something. When people hand you weakness, you don't accept it. You build your own strength. And when they try to seat you in silence, you sit in truth instead. The crowd erupted not in cheers, not in applause, but in the heavy buzz of judgment. Neighbors turned toward Linda and her children, eyes sharp, whispers spreading like fire. My grandchildren squirmed in their seats, their smirks burned off their faces. Emily's eyes brimmed with tears she tried to hide. Jacob stared at the ground. I let the silence stretch, then leaned on my cane. "So if anyone here still believes in family," I said, "remember this. Respect is not inherited. It's earned. And when it's broken, sometimes you have to bring your own chair." I turned, sat back down in the oak seat, and folded my hands in my lap. My message was delivered. Irrefutable. Unforgettable. On stage, Linda's voice cracked as she tried to restart the auction, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. By nightfall, the story would be everywhere, woven into every whisper over pie and every conversation by the Ferris wheel. The chair they had given me to break me had now broken them. And I wasn't finished yet. The fair changed everything. By the time Sunday rolled around again, I didn't even need to bring my oak chair to remind them the whole town already had. Whispers had hardened into judgment, neighbors into witnesses. What my family had once buried behind closed doors now lived out in the open, and there was no way to sweep it back under the rug. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The chair had been their weapon of humiliation. I'd turned it into my banner of defiance. Now it was time for the final blow, the kind that leaves scars deeper than bruises, the kind that lives in paper and signatures long after voices go quiet. On Monday morning, I walked into Mr. Alcott's law office, my will clutched under my arm. He'd known me for 30 years, seen me through mortgages and hospital bills and Frank's passing. When he asked what brought me in, I laid the stack of documents on his desk like stones dropped into a pond. I want it all rewritten, I said. My voice was steady, without hesitation. The house, the accounts, the savings bonds, every penny that used to have their names on it. Erase them. Every one of them. He looked at me over his glasses. Are you sure, Joe? That's a heavy decision. I leaned forward. Heavy decisions are the only ones worth making. For 2 hours, we worked through the details. I signed page after page, the ink steady in my hand. When it was done, my estate no longer belonged to the children who laughed at me. It belonged to the women's shelter down on Greenway Avenue, the one that gives battered mothers and forgotten grandmothers a bed when no one else will. As I pressed the final signature down, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not free, no. Freedom was too soft a word. Vindicated. That was it. That Sunday, I went to Linda's house one last time. I carried the oak chair in as I always had, set it down at the head of the table. They watched me, silent, uneasy. The air was thick with shame and fear, like smoke in a closed room. I waited until the plates were full, until every fork was in motion, before I spoke. I went to see my lawyer this week. My words cut through the clutter. Forks froze midair. Heads lifted. Every dime, every acre, every scrap of inheritance you thought was waiting for you, it's gone. Not lost. Given. To people who will know what to do with it. Linda's face strained white. Emily gasped. Jacob muttered, "You can't be serious." I leaned back in the oak chair, steady as stone. "Oh, I'm serious. More serious than you were when you gave me a broken seat and called it kindness." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. I let it stretch, let it choke them, let it hammer home the truth they'd never escape. Then I stood. My hands rested briefly on the oak arms, the chair that had carried me from humiliation to power. I looked each of them in the eye, one by one, and let the final words drop like a hammer. You thought the chair broke me, but it broke you instead. I left them sitting there, mouths open, food turning cold on their plates, while my footsteps echoed down the hall. And this time, I didn't look back.